The attorneys at Peronick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyce have been helping their injured clients since 1955 and are now on this radio station to provide guidance to you. Listen to FLA Law each Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Let decades of experience help you and your family. Offices in Clearwater, non-attorney spokesman.
You may be owed some money. After 911 and 411, call 541. That's 727-541-1741. Call Gulfstream Motorsports for a diminished value report. Due to my 28 years experience in the auto salvage business, I'm very good with wrecks. So if your car's been involved in a wreck, call me for a diminished value report. Call 727-541-1741. You may be owed some money for the lost value of your repaired vehicle. And visit us at GulfstreamMotorsports.com.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
That's the Shrink and Wrap Show every Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. Coming to you from glorious Clearwater, Florida, the perfect place for writers to write and readers to enjoy a good book. At the bottom of the hour, our special correspondent, Bria Burton, has made a new sci-fi book buzz, and we will be playing that. But right now, I get to turn to somebody who I'm so thrilled she's on the program again. Margaret George is a best-selling author, historical novelist, and not only that, of magnificent novels that have spanned many, many years. One of them, of course, is a very famous one that everybody, I think, knows about because it was a groundbreaking book. Her autobiography of Henry VIII, told from Henry's point of view. It was so clever, and I was so thrilled when I read that book. I remember the time when I started it, and I loved it. She also wrote Mary Queen of Scotland, Memoirs of Cleopatra, and most recently, she's done 2 books about Nero, both The Confessions of Young Nero and Splendor Before the Dark. I'm so happy to welcome you to Joy on Paper, Margaret.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay?
You're a little soft. Can you get a little...
Oh, I'm going to switch from off the speakerphone because that's probably...
Yeah, that's the best thing.
Now, tell me, is it better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, I can... Let me change the volume a bit here.
Okay, because we want to hear it.
Now, is it any better?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Wow.
All right.
It's so good to talk to you. I was so thrilled when I contacted you and you told me that you were just in Rome.
Yes, I was just in Rome. I was there, in fact, July, so I'm just back. And we escaped the terrible heat wave. I mean, that was after I left. But while I was there, I was able to visit that site they had just opened to the public about the place where Caesar was assassinated. They'd known for a long time where it was, and you could see it from the street, but it's like 12 feet down below, and it was all locked up and everything. And then they opened it up right before we got there. So that was really very moving to go see because I think there were a lot of ghosts down there in that area. They did stage some reenactments of the assassination down there. They used to, but you had to look from way up above. And then yesterday, in the New York Times, and a few days earlier, there was an announcement that they have found what they think is Nero's theater that was attached to his palace, which was one of his palaces was over where the Vatican area is now. And they were clearing away to build a Four Seasons hotel The law in Italy is that they have to, if they find anything of archaeological value, they have to stop their construction. So that happens all the time, of course, in Italy. And so they found this, and they had to pause. And the more they've looked at it, the more they think that, yes, it is the long-lost theater where Nero liked to perform in private. So I miss seeing that, but as my Italian friend just said yesterday, well, it'll be years before the public can really get in to see it, so you have plenty of time.
But for you, Rome, it takes on a very special nature because so much of your book, when you wrote, of course, when you wrote the Cleopatra book, the memoirs of Cleopatra, you were doing a great deal of research about Rome as well. So it must be pretty thrilling for you to know, you're walking in the footprints, really, of these people.
Yeah, it's really kind of not repeatable, or the imitations aren't the same. There's something about being there in the very same place, that just gives it an air that is so authentic. I did spend time in Rome way back with Cleopatra because Cleopatra came to Rome and she lived there for 2 years in Caesar's villa, and she was there when he was assassinated. So there was a lot of Roman material that I learned and got familiar with, trying to figure out exactly where Caesar's villa even was, and also trying to find something that looked like it with the gardens. It might not have been the exact same spot because, visually you want to picture what their lives were like. So, yeah, Rome really kind of feels like home to me, I think, in many ways, at least historically it does.
Well, you certainly write about it so beautifully. I remember when I was reading Cleopatra that I at some points when I was reading it, I would close my eyes and it was like I was there. Your writing is so beautiful. Now, today, of course, is August 1st, so it's really appropriate that you're on because this is the day, August 1st, that Octavian, who's later known as Augustus, entered Alexandria in Egypt. Yes. And this is the day that he took over the control of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, exactly. It was the end of Antony and Cleopatra, and the idea of the divided empire, which came about much later with the Eastern Empire and the Western. But the whole Shakespearean play covers that, and it is very meaningful that a whole month of August, apparently, I didn't realize this, but when he took Cleopatra's children and Antony's children back to Rome so they could march through the triumph, and he had a wax image made of Cleopatra to be pulled along. It had a snake on her arm. Was like the 13th, 14th, and 15th of August. And apparently they still call that the Feriae Augusti, the holidays of August. And I guess it's a holiday like it is for us, the 4th of July, or some national kind of holiday. And so that's when the Italians really take time off. And I think it's kind of eerie that it's still an echo of that triumph that he had so long ago, 2,000 years just about.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And it's magical to read your book, which takes us back to that time. It is so good. That book, when we're in that book, I know that I mentioned a fan of yours named Mickey, and you were so kind and you sent her a lovely photograph. And like me, we had the same reaction that we're reading the book, but we would sometimes sort of just sit back and close our eyes, and we felt like we were there. The way that you told the story as a confession, really a memoir of Cleopatra, and the same way that you did with Henry, that we're getting her voice and getting her thoughts. It's really very clever and beautifully done.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think the first person is the way to go if you're going to have a historical character, because, we all know what they did. We know, but Henry married 6 wives, and Cleopatra killed herself with a snake, and that she'd take up with Anthony. But nobody, you want to hear from them why they did it, because there can be a number of different motivations. And it's just that if you can make it as if they're telling you, it becomes much more real. And a lot of people tell the story from, like somebody else in the court or something like that. And that means that you're never, you're getting what that person saw, but you're never able to get inside the head of the character that you're really interested in, because let's face it, you wouldn't be reading the book about the uncle if you didn't care about the person he was describing, which is his nephew. We should have Caligula so that you could, if he was Nero's uncle, see what was going through his head, when he first saw little Nero. But in my book, I have to tell it from Nero's point of view. But yeah, I mean, that's the only way you're gonna really feel that you're getting the story. Although, of course, the writer is, making dramatic choices on his or her own. I mean, obviously, you're not really Henry, you're not really Nero, you're not really Cleopatra, but sometimes it felt like it. So.
Well, sometimes you do such deep research, and of course you're famous for your research. They call it meticulous research, but it's deep. You do this deep dive. You read so much from so many different points of view that, in fact, the character, it starts maybe as a character, but they do tend to take over your mind.
They do. They become very much alive. Well, they are alive for that time. They're sort of brought back to life again, and they become right there with you. Some of the other characters too, are very vivid, that lived at the same time. I think that's what, like Shakespeare does that certainly, and it's interesting that in real life, and it's in my book, the real speech that Antony gave at Caesar's funeral is not nearly as stirring as the one that Shakespeare wrote. So it's funny, but writers do add their own things, and of course, to have Shakespeare remodel your stuff is a big deal, and it's good. But yeah, the real speech was stirring, but it was nothing like the one that Shakespeare did. So you have to take for the grain of salt also what the writer's putting in, because whether you like it or not, you are adding yourself to this. It's not completely without your own tainting or your own influence.
Now, where did you travel when you were doing research for Cleopatra? What locations did you go to?
Well, of course, Egypt. We have to go to Egypt, and the interesting thing is that Alexandria is so different from the rest of Egypt. It was a Mediterranean city. It was a Greek city. It was an international kind of city, and it was not Nile centered. It was centered on the Mediterranean. It was an international type of city. You had all kinds of different people there. Those things on the sea tend to have ports, and they bring in outside influences. So you had to find that. Well, there's no such thing as an existing Hellenistic city anymore. They just don't exist. You can't go to one and say this is what it was like. And also, Alexandria itself is now an Arab city. At one point, Nasser kicked out all the foreigners. It was a very foreign-dominated city, especially when it was under the British rule. So he kicked out all the foreigners and took all that influence, left. And it's still sort of white. I mean, it's still kind of whitewashed. I mean, the apartment buildings and all, but it is very much, an Egyptian city now. And so you have to kind of try to blank out when you hear the call to prayer, you have to kind of blank it out of your ears, because obviously Cleopatra would have never heard that. But the harbor is still the same. It was a big, big harbor that held 1,200 boats could dock there. And where the lighthouse was, the lighthouse is no longer there, but there is a fort built there out of some of the blocks of the lighthouse. So you can picture that, and you can picture Caesar fighting on that connection out there to the lighthouse. So the topography is the same, but not the ambiance of the city. They've kept the grid, the main grid through the central part, which went straight through the city, east to west, and then another big one that came down north to south. So you have that, but you have to work very hard in your imagination to populate it with some other houses on it.
Well, one of the things is the boat. The way you describe Cleopatra's boat. Wow.
Well, yes, that boat. Of course, it was made famous in the Cleopatra movie with Elizabeth Taylor. that boat. And also, I did, as I said, go to Rome. And the one place I didn't get to go to, but I did belatedly after the book was written, was I had not gotten down the Nile to Nubia, because in the book she does. And I had to rely on all these old photographs and descriptions, because now they've dammed up the Nile, and some of those cataracts are not even extant anymore. But there was a trip to Sudan that took us there. That was in 2019, and where I could finally see the pyramid in Nubia, where I have a scene with Cleopatra and the Kandaki, and it looked just like I described it. I mean, I was thought, wow, it really looks just the way I described it. So I visited it belatedly, but it was very satisfying to see it finally, because I think you really want to see what you're writing about.
Well, it was so lucky that you got to do that trip to Nubia before the
Yes, right before the pandemic and right before the revolution. It was kind of brewing at the time, and the State Department was saying don't go there. But it wasn't until like a few months afterwards that it really broke open, and it certainly is very tragic that the revolution didn't achieve what they thought it would. They got rid of one dictator, but they've got another one. So, yeah, but I just barely got in there, and that was a wonderful trip. They have lots of little pyramids there. They started building pyramids much later than the ancient Egyptians had done them, and they're kind of steep-sided. They look a little different, and they're not nearly as tall, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, that's an exciting trip. Not many people go there.
Yeah, no, they don't. They sure don't.
So did you meet people there who had read your Cleopatra?
Well, not really. I hadn't, because I didn't. I don't think the Nubians, I don't know if it was ever translated. It was not translated into Arabic, so I don't think they could have. And I mean, maybe some of the the expats and the foreign community might have read it, but I didn't meet them. So they were all, there were not many of them there at the time. I think we didn't even have an ambassador. So yeah.
Well, talking about translations, your books have been translated into so many languages.
They have. The most interesting one that happened to me, I think, was on Goodreads. If anybody looks on Goodreads, your book will be on it, and they have a little thing where you can click on other formats. And I clicked on other formats or other editions, and I saw there was one in Iran, and which was of course completely a bootlegged, illegal one, and it told what bookstore it was at in Iran, and I thought that's really fascinating. So as it happened, we actually knew someone in the medical school department here who is Iranian and was going back to Tehran, and we asked him if he would go to the bookstore and get a copy. So he did. And he said he was going to ask for 2, but he said it was suspicious if he asked for 2. He didn't want to rouse any suspicions. So he brought this copy back, and had this wonderful bootleg Helen of Troy translated into Persian.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I could read that if I saw it.
Really? You can read Persian?
Yes. Well, my husband and I lived. That's where we lived.
Oh my God.
And so, yeah, I learned the language the right way. I learned it from my landlady's children. They taught me. So I was speaking sort of childish Farsi when I started, because the girls, she had 3 girls, and they wanted to teach me. They were so happy, to have me there as living in their house. I had my own little apartment. She was a widow, and she needed to, make some money. So she rented this little apartment to me. And it was so wonderful to learn Farsi that way. And they also taught me how to write. And so that's how I learned. And that's a great way to learn a language.
Yeah, I bet. Well, how long were you there?
Well, 4 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's
Well,
plenty of time to learn a language.
Oh, yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
I did it. I loved it. It's lots of fun to write. I love writing Farsi. It's so much fun. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because it's pretty. I mean, it looks very pretty on the page.
It does. So next time I come up to see you,
You'll have to see my book. Yeah, I was very excited about it. I didn't. People said, "Oh, well, it's illegal, and they shouldn't have done it." And I said, "Well, I don't really care. It's nice that people want to read it."
Yeah.
So anyway, that was one of the unusual translations.
Oh, that's cool. I love that.
So yeah, I mean, I think I can't read most of these languages, so therefore I don't know whether they're good translations or bad translations. But I understand it in Japan. It's really the translator who is the star, not the author, so that people will buy books by certain translators because they're so good, and not buy the book if it's not translated by that person. So they're kind of the rock stars, and they get the larger payment, which is, I think, interesting too.
Well, I'm sure that the Japanese and all the Chinese, they love to travel. And I know that when they're in Europe, whenever I would be in Europe, there'd be so many tourists to all the locations, like, the castles and up to Scotland, where Mary Queen of Scots was. You'd just be surrounded by, travelers and tourists who were interested in the history.
Yeah, that's interesting. I assume they travel any time of year. I mean, it wasn't a specific time of year that they did or didn't travel.
No,
or not.
Yeah, all the time. So it's wonderful when they would. I would meet them often. Now we're going to talk about Scotland in a little while.
Okay. Let's not forget.
I don't want to forget that, because that's one of the places where I actually ran into a lot of Chinese tourists when I was last time in Scotland. But I'm going to play in a minute. I'm going to play a little book buzz. We do these book buzzes for books that we want people to read. And I have 3 special correspondents who are doing these 2-minute little book buzzes, and it's to help promote authors and to let people know about the books, remind them, because one of the things, as you know, people forget. And so we're doing more and more of those, both here on the radio program and also on Facebook and other social media, so that we can remind people that just because a book was written 5 years ago doesn't mean it's not great today.
Yeah.
But people forget. And
sure do.
It's difficult in this day and age for authors to get a lot of opportunities to promote. And after we went through this pandemic, it was really devastating. So I'm going to play this book buzz. It's by a lovely author. She's herself a sci-fi author, and she's doing these special ones for sci-fi books. But you hold on, because I listen to it, and then I'm coming right back, and we're going to talk about Scotland. Okay.
Hello, fellow sci-fi readers. This is author Bria Burton reporting for Joy on Paper with your science fiction book buzz. Today's communique to galaxies near and far includes a 2021 Space Fleet series starter, Victory's Wake, by Daniel Gibbs and Steve Raza. The co-authored novel is Deception Fleet Book 1, available in print and ebook. Now, let's download the book buzz. The last battles have ended between the Terran Coalition and the League, but the Galactic Cold War has just begun. Intelligence Officer Jackson Adams receives new orders fresh off an undercover mission from the Coalition President himself to get to the bottom of a refugee crisis at the border world of Afindikra, where an unknown entity is suspected of human trafficking and other heinous crimes. Could it be League infiltrators, and if so, what is their endgame now that they have lost the war? Adams assembles a squad that includes flight surveillance and munitions experts, all of whom have questionable methods according to the powers that be. Still, Adam's faith in his team's abilities will be tested to the max against the nefarious enemy striking in dark corners of the galaxy, where the most vulnerable have become unwitting victims. This military space opera blends political science fiction with Mission Impossible spycraft, and it's a page-turning thrill ride that's both thought-provoking and infused with the right measure of faith and hope. Co-authors Steve Raza and Daniel Gibbs have collaborated on the 6 novels of the Deception Fleet series. Raza is a fan of all things science fiction and superhero and an avid student of history. Gibbs hopes to bring an authentic lens to military science fiction, especially around the trials and tribulation of those who serve. This is Bria Burton with your Futuristic Fiction Fix, signing off.
Okay. Was that nice?
Yes, but now we must go way back instead of into the future.
Well, I want to talk about Scotland because I know that one of the things that I love, I was actually planning to visit Scotland just before the pandemic. We were going to go with my son to England, and we were then going to go from Cambridge up to Scotland because my husband and I love Scotland. We spent a lot of time in Scotland. When we lived in just outside of London and we shared an airplane, my husband would fly up and we'd fly up to Scotland and we have friends there and I love it. And so when I was thinking about you, and I, of course, think of Mary, Queen of Scotland, which is such a great book. Again, with your writing, you take us to a place, and Scotland is, I just love it. So when you were doing the Mary book, tell us about your first, why did you decide to do Mary? So many people would, you had done Henry, and then tell us about your involvement with Mary. How did she grab you, the interest in her, sort of just take you away?
Well, several reasons, I guess. First of all, it was still it was in the same era and the same family, but it was one step removed because she wasn't one of Henry's children, and she was of a different branch of that family, and it was in a different country. And then also, I just think I'm drawn to what I call operatic lives. I guess we're on the stage by the end of the opera. That there's a lot of bodies on the on the ground and a lot of singing and a lot of laments and a lot of tragedies. I guess I'm just sort of drawn to tragic stories, like maybe because I share a birthday with Edgar Allan Poe, but she certainly had a tragic story, but also was very operatic. It's hard to outdo the operatic aspects of her life. So, I think one thing, she had, like some historical characters, she kind of had two lives. She had the life she had in France, and I always think of her basically as more French than anything else, because not only was she brought up in France and married the French Dauphin and was briefly Queen of France, but she had just basically a French mindset. I mean, her personality lent itself to the French way of life. It's interesting, like Jackie Kennedy said her favorite era would be 17th century France. And Jackie Kennedy clearly was another one who was very French. I mean, she was French by family. But when Mary was only 19, she was widowed, and she then became the Dauphin. She became the doyenne, the dowager queen. And had she had a different temperament, and here's where the operatic part comes in, she would have just retired to be the doyenne for the rest of her life, and the dowager queen, have beautiful palaces, be able to live in luxury, speak her beloved French, have her French poets writing to her. Instead, she took on the challenge of returning to Scotland to take over as queen, which she legally had been all that time. She was only 19. She knew nothing about Scotland. Really, she knew nothing about Scotland. Her maiden mother tongue was French. She had no experience with the duplicity and the backstabbing and the stuff with all the clans. She was politically really naive. She had not learned from her. She had some uncles in France, the Guise family, that were masterminds of politicians, but she hadn't really learned from them. And she was the wrong religion for that country because it had just become, virulently Protestant. So it was like stepping into a snake pit. And the fact that she, made many wrong decisions, which of course make it much more operatic, because if they never make any wrong decisions, you don't have any interesting stories. But she was really always, fighting an uphill battle. But you had to admire her courage. I think one of her leading traits was this courage that she had, and great personal charm. And those two things made her a very interesting character. When she was in prison many times, not for crimes, but for being thrown off the throne or fighting on the wrong side, she could always charm her jailers, and she could always escape as long as she was in Scotland. When she got to England, she found that these keepers of hers were loyal to Elizabeth, and they weren't subject to her charms. What is Elizabeth called? The bosom serpent. So I just found her quite fascinating. And plus, Scotland in that era is fascinating. And I am Scottish in large proportions, DNA-wise anyway. So I enjoyed being there. I spent about 3 weeks going around to all the places where she had been living there. She traveled a lot. She was always on the go. So there were a lot of different castles that she lived in and stayed in, and you can kind of go all over Scotland, visiting these. And of course, it's a beautiful landscape, beautiful place. And one thing that happens with my book so far, I should knock on wood, is I've been extraordinarily lucky in the timing of things. And it just happened that this was 1997, 1987, and it was the 500th year since Mary's execution. So there was this big, tons of these exhibits and things on loan from France and other places about Mary. Lots of books published, lots of things that I could see and take home with me and to study later. It was quite something, because a lot of those things just don't come out of their hiding, but they came for this. So I was very lucky, and that gave me a lot of material to work with, and including there's a bust of Mary, a bronze one that was made by a French sculptor, and it was on loan to the Museum of Edinburgh, and you could get a replica for a lordly price. You could get a replica, so I did. So I have it, and so that wouldn't have been available had there not been this special time of commemorating her.
Oh, I love Edinburgh. We used to stay at the George Hotel. Oh,
yeah.
I love that place. It was so wonderful. And
Edinburgh was a place of sort of like great tumult for Mary, because a lot of things took place there. When I was going through it, through Holyrood, at that point, you weren't allowed to take pictures in there, and you could only go in on a guided tour. So I had to have these pictures, because when I wrote about it, I would have to be able to reconstruct what it looked like. And so I had this camera in my raincoat pocket. Of course, you always have to have a raincoat in Scotland, so nobody was suspicious. And I would always kind of fall behind when the group had just gone into the next room and take pictures. And I was able to, pace off the steps in the one little room where Richelieu was killed. And, so I had some information I couldn't have gotten just from getting a guidebook. But anyway, I understand now that you can take all the pictures you want. So that wouldn't be necessary for someone doing a book like that today.
Well, I think that, again, what's great about your writing, this ability to take the reader into a location with her, with Mary, I think it was so... it's funny, you know history, you know what's going to happen to her.
Yeah, you know
it, but you just something about it. You just keep hoping it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
it's strange, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. It's like watching the Zapruder tapes. Where you keep hoping that the ending is going to be different.
Yeah,
it never is.
It is. It's this ability of yours to capture historical character. Of course, it's partly the deep reading that you do.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's why I've never had a research assistant, because if I did, they would be reading the things, and they might make notes of things they think I should know, but often the little tidbit that really makes a scene or something, they might not notice it. For for example, there's Octavian and his elevator sandals, which which was a real key to his character. That he wore these elevator sandals, and Cleopatra. I had a scene where Cleopatra sees the elevator sandals, and that changes her feeling for how she's going to deal with him. So I just think that it's the responsibility to just do the research yourself so you don't miss anything. That might be key, you just don't know what's going to be important in the book.
And so often when you're reading a book, it isn't the book that gives you the clue to the person. Sometimes it's the footnotes. And when you follow a footnote, it is so exciting when you see a little footnote and it just says, a little thing in passing. And then you follow that footnote and it can lead you down trails that you never imagined you to go.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. So, that's the fun of the research. And I think one problem some writers have is they don't know when to stop the research because it's so compelling and kind of addicting. So there's I have a friend who's been working on a book for I swear it must be 12 years. And she's always, quote, making progress, but she's always still doing research and finding another interesting thing about this character. She's a medieval nun. But I think, sooner or later you have to say, I know enough, and I'm not going to learn that much more by pursuing everything, and there's endless things keep coming out. So, you have to start writing in enough time that you can do a fair job on the writing that you're going to do, because you don't want to shortchange the very thing that is your project because you waited too long. You're still enmeshed in all this research, and then it's a hurry-up job to get the manuscript done. You want to give yourself time to revise and to think about things and really, give it the attention it deserves. So I have a rule. I try to break it in half. Half the time research, and then the other half it has to be writing.
Well, did you find any of your roots in Scotland?
I really haven't, because they came over so long ago that that they came over, but you don't really know why. And so I don't know. I mean, actually, DNA has showed what places they came from in Ireland and Scotland. So, which is interesting because then you kind of begin to get more of a picture of the area they came from, and then maybe be able to figure out, why they came. In Ireland, they have a special American center for all the people whose ancestors came from Ulster, which is a lot of them, including some of mine. And they have a reenactment of the ship that they came over on, because they would board these ships, and when we were there, they said, the guy was reenacting. He said, go around tonight and see your friends, for you won't be seeing Ireland again. And I thought it really brought home to me, what was it like to leave in the 1700s and no, you're not coming back. There's no FaceTime. There's no jets. You're not going to see these people again. And what a thing compelled these people to move. But they did in hundreds.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of it, of course, was the potato famine, but also the opportunity and religious freedom was so important. And I really don't have a great desire. I toured Europe so much and so often, but of the two countries that I would like to go back to, I would like to go to Scotland because I still have a lot of friends there, and also to Ireland because I just like Ireland. I always had lots of fun there, and I always tell people, people will say, well, where should I go in Europe? And I say, well, you can do that grand tour of Europe. The people used to go to all the capital cities. And one of the best ways during the pandemic, I was promoting the grand tour by reading Tasha Alexander's books, Lady Emily books, her Lady Emily books, because Lady Emily goes to all the major cities in Europe and beyond, into Egypt and Turkey, and so I think it's a great way for people to learn about countries before they go there. Both like to read your books, so they have a deep, deep understanding of the major characters and the major leaders in those countries. And then books like Tasha Alexander's Lady Emily series. She has a new book coming out in the fall. It's called A Cold Highland Wind. And that's exactly what you get up there in Scotland.
Yes, I saw in the paper that it's 64 in Edinburgh today. And that's warm. Well, the Scots say we have two winters, a white one and a green one. Although it can be nice there when the sun's out.
Oh, it's beautiful there. Even those foggy days, there's something special about Scotland. And of course, when you go over to Ireland and it's green, this really, the green in Ireland is really a fabulous green.
Yes, it is. It's wonderful. I love Ireland too, and I only finally got to Ireland a couple of years ago. All these years I've never been there, so I was really happy to finally be able to get there. And it, like you say, it was also a lot of fun. So the Grand Tour, though, didn't people spend years doing this?
Oh,
wasn't
yeah.
it? I mean, how long were they gone?
Well, no, they usually take like 2 years after university, or when the Americans came over, they take 2 years to do that tour, and they go to all the major cities and have a heck of a good time, which was done also. One, they studied the languages when they got there.
Mm-hmm.
And they also learned a lot about history and about people and human nature, I think. And I think you have to be a sort of patient person when you traveled in those days.
Oh, yeah. And also, wasn't it that in those days, too, they often had these introductions to people. They would say, they didn't just, make a reservation at a Hilton hotel. They'll be introduced to so-and-so and so-and-so, and then they might stay with them or stay in one of their cottages or something. So it was they kind of went already knowing some connections.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it was a way to make these connections and make them strong. So, yeah, it was lots of fun. So that's one thing. Of course, now that people can travel again, it's great. And I think that if I'm looking for a destination, I'm not so sure. There are some cities that, like recently Paris, was just too hectic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be there at that time, but someplace like Scotland and Ireland, absolutely fabulous places to be.
Yeah, and if you have time, if you could go up to Orkney, which is above Scotland, and see those prehistoric rings and all that, they're very evocative, and they're really beautiful.
So now, give us a little bit of your background, because you've been traveling since you were pretty young.
Yeah, well, my father joined the Foreign Service when I was 4 years old, so as when I was living with my family, I went where his assignments were, and his first one was Taiwan, although it was before the Taiwan we know now. It was still Formosa. It was a really little rural island. No one paid much attention to it. There wasn't much to do. I don't know why we had a consulate there, but we did. And it was then my mother and I were evacuated when Chiang Kai-shek was going to come over. So that was my first one, but I was too young to go to school then, and my memories of it are those of a very young child. Then his next assignment, which I loved, was Israel. We were in Tel Aviv when I was 7, 8, and 9, and I think that was a very formative time for me, because I started writing there, and I got into history there because, of course, there's so much history in the Middle East and in Israel. And it was all real, I mean, it was like, here's where such and such, here's the Dead Sea. And I pestered my father to take me to Egypt because I wanted to see the pyramids. And we were studying history in Israel and all those things. So Israel and Egypt had no diplomatic relations then, but he could go there as a diplomat to visit the American embassy there on some concocted business. And so I was 9 years old, and he took me to see all those things, and that just got me even more turned on about ancient Egypt and everything. And then his next assignment was Germany, and we were in Berlin until I was 13. And then he was assigned back to Washington, so that's why I had my high school in Washington. after they left, I graduated high school. They went on to Norway and Japan. After that, I would visit them, but I didn't ever live in those places. So yeah, that was my background. But I think Israel was the most formative because of the writing and because of the history. I mean, I would be a different person maybe if we hadn't lived there. I don't think I would have been a different person if I hadn't lived in Germany. I wouldn't know about certain kinds of mustard. I learned to love hot mustard in Germany, and I learned to speak German, as a child, or a child's version of German, and I learned about European history, but I didn't do things that really changed the kind of person and interest I had.
So you were there. You remember when there was East Germany and West Germany?
Oh yes, we were there before there was a Berlin Wall, though, but they were still really strictly divided. And no, there was the communist menace. It was really the height of the Cold War with where all the spy novels are set now, because it was the 1950s, and so. I'm wondering. We always wondered if my father was actually a secret agent because he had a mysterious thing when my mother and I had to leave Taiwan. He disappeared for about 6 months and was supposedly in Hong Kong, and he didn't come with us. And we always wondered if he'd been recruited to the CIA because if anybody could be a spy and you wouldn't know it, it would be him. So he would never tell us. But I think. He certainly knew, as I said, we knew who the spooks were. My mother would say, we know we aren't them, but we know who they are, is what he said. So there's all that spy stuff. I've been to the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. It's very interesting.
Oh, it's great. I love that museum. Been there many times because I was, of course, I was able to be in Germany when it was divided. And it's still... People don't understand when we went to Berlin after the wall had fallen, the difference of being in West Berlin, which was so beautifully pristine and clean and everything. And then you'd go to still, even after the wall came down, the East Side was so different.
Yeah. It wasn't a very good advertisement for communism. If you live on this is what it'll be like. But I think now it's kind of evolved into being sort of like I wouldn't say a Greenwich Village sort of place, but it has character. And I think a lot of the buildings have been refurbished in hotels and stores and restaurants. Yeah. It's kind of a hot place that has a lot of atmosphere. And they've replanted the linden trees. And so I haven't been there in 5 or 6 years. I'd like to go back and see it now. And it was such a walkable small city. I was surprised as an adult when I could walk into the forbidden east side. It isn't that big. I mean, the core is not that big that you can't walk from one side to the other at the time. Whereas the western one is so big that you couldn't. You got to have a car.
Well, it is remarkable for people who don't understand what communism really was like in those days. When you look back on it and you remember them on the other side, the division, it was incredible. So it's actually very, very dynamic place now.
Yeah, I remember when it was still divided. There was a train that went from West Berlin to Braunschweig in Germany. It was like a sealed train, and only diplomats and Americans and so on could ride in this sealed train. It went all the way through East Germany, but you couldn't get off. So people would ride on it just to take a ride, because it was like 2 or 3 hours. They get off at Braunschweig and have lunch, get on the train and come back. And so that way you saw the landscape of East Germany, which was pretty bleak. But it was funny about that sealed train that people took, and I guess people now wouldn't understand that at all.
Understand it. Well, maybe there's another book in you. I don't know if you're working on a historical book, but maybe you should do some research on your dad and write a thriller.
Yeah, I have thought about that, because I think, there is a mystery there with him. He passed away, several years ago. So, but he never would tell us. He never would, and he'd just sort of chuckle and say, "Oh, you're just making that up." But we never knew. My sister and I spent time figuring it out, or thinking about it. But it's an interesting thing, and I may try something completely different, than going so far back. Although it would have to be fairly far back. I wouldn't write a really modern novel. I mean, I think the Cold War is far enough back.
Yeah.
That it's historical now. It's not. Besides, I don't think spying is as much fun now because it's all high tech stuff. Whereas the stuff in the Spy Museum shows you what it was like to actually have to go out there as a person and do this.
Well, yeah, you could write it from the child's point of view. Start in Formosa, and yeah, I think we have another book in you.
We may have another book. Yeah. Well, I found the whole series, The Americans, fascinating for that reason, about the Russian agents who had to live pretending to be Americans and all the stuff they had to do. So it did spark an interest in me. Thank you. You may have given me a good lead for something to really think about. This is different than what I've done before.
Yeah, and I think it would be fun.
It would be. It would be a lot of fun. So
because you can include your memories and you can include the places you've been. So it's something, for generations down the line. I wish my grandparents had written a book, but this would be a great way to preserve those memories, really, starting all the way from the Israel. And you have a major book here, Margaret. This would be so much fun. I want to read it.
What should we call it, though? I was a childhood spy. No, I was the daughter of the spy master's daughter, the spy's daughter.
Oh, we're getting there. We're getting there. We have to play around with that.
I'm bad with titles, so anybody thinks of a good one, let me know.
Well, I'll work on that. But you're good with the words, so you have to start writing. I think this would be great. And the wonderful thing about you would also include the history of the places you've been. I mean, when you were in Israel, you were walking in the footsteps of Jesus many times.
That's right. Absolutely.
Which is so exciting. I mean, that's one of the most exciting things when you're in Israel and you're walking along, you're sort of not thinking about it. And then somebody will come along and they'll say, and you notice that they're doing something. And then you realize they're walking, trying to, walk in the exact footsteps of Jesus. It's so exciting. I mean,
that's true. Yeah.
So you, as a child, bringing this child into the spy to see, this is what will make your spy book so much more exciting. Because we never get it from a child, how a child would see a spy father. I think it would be great.
Or how you might suspect he's a spy, but you never find out.
Exactly. You don't find. Well, we don't know, but a lot of suspicious things are happening. Yeah, and then it turns out, that all the time it was your mother who was the spy. So you see, we have lots of twists here, Margaret.
We have lots of twists. Yeah. Well, that can be fictionalized. I don't think my mother. I don't know. You never know about her. She was kind of crafty in her own way.
Margaret, this is going to be it's going to be a fictionalized version, but you get to put in a lot of your history, which would be fun for your family.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I just never thought of it. I thought of memoirs as sort of dull things where you have to write, what you did and all this stuff. And it isn't of much interest to people outside of you.
No, turn it into a novel.
Yeah.
It can be another best-selling novel for you. Because your writing is so terrific. I mean, you write better than anybody I can think of. I really. What you would do with all the way you can weave in the history of all these locations. I mean, this is perfect, Margaret.
Good idea. I have to decide: is it a spy book or is it a memoir book, or is it?
It's a thriller. We're going to make.
It would have to be a thriller because if it was just a memoir,
no, it's not a memoir. We don't want a memoir. We want a thriller. A real thriller. Margaret George is going to write a thriller, New York Times best-selling thriller. That's what I want.
All right. Okay. All right. Me too. Well, thank you. I'm going to really think about this.
Good.
So thank you.
Good, because you have an interesting life, and it will be terrific. And Big Ed is playing my music. I have to get out of here.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you again. Okay.
Okay. Love you.
Love you too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye. Okay, that is a great Margaret George. You have to read her books. I know if you look at them, when we talk about binge reading, sometimes we talk about you read 4 or 5 books. Well, one of her books is 4 or 5 books. So just think of it as binge reading. You will have so much fun. I tell you, the autobiography of Henry VIII is so absorbing that you cannot stop reading it. Once you start, it just grabs you because you want to know what Henry is thinking. And Margaret figured it out. I think Henry must have come to her in a dream. Anyway, bye-bye now.